All right, so it's 5 p.m. on my clock. I'm sure everyone kind of gets on right the minute before and the minute after, so we are picking up a couple of more people right now. But we do have a lot of material to cover, so I am going to get started again. Please use the Q&A to submit any questions. And then if you have any comments, either if something's not working for you, you can go ahead and submit it through the Q&A as well, and we'll be able to respond back to you. Besides that, I'll try to cover questions as we go along, but if a question comes in that we know we're going to cover later on, we may hold it, and we'll try to let you know that we are holding it. And I'm going to head and start sharing my screen. Okay. So this is landscape revitalization for HOAs. And we have some really fantastic things that we're going to cover today. So I'm really excited to share this with you. We have a lot of new changes in our HOA program and just things that we've been developing, and we're very excited to share. So we'll be going over, sorry, technical difficulties. There we go. We'll be going over very, very briefly drought and shortage. What is revitalization? HOA planning, conservation programs, players and roles, my top 10 revitalization tips, and then a little bit about our warm season grass removal rebate. So how do you think your HOA landscape performs? That's what I want to start off with. And I'm very interested to hear your perspective. Now, this is an anonymous survey, so please feel free to give an honest answer. We have 1, needs improvement, 2, getting better, only a few challenges, 3, average, not the best, not the worst, 4, above average, needs only some fine tuning, and 5, we're perfect. We have everything that's absolutely the best. So we'll go ahead and launch that poll and get it started. All right. Sorry, I'm trying to get this figured out. I am working with my equipment at home. It's not doing what I wanted it to do. All right. Is that showing full screen for you now? I'm waiting for confirmation that it is. And presenter view. All right. I don't know why it's showing on that one in presenter view, but on my screen it's showing it in. Sorry, we have the request to not show it with the additional slides, but I don't know why when I'm doing it. Probably thinks that it's a second screen. Probably. Let's see if I pull it over. Is that better, or is it that? Is that better? Too many screens.
This is perfect.
Okay, thank you, Jill. Okay, So the results, all right, a lot of you are saying that you need improvement, and then some of you getting better, only a few challenges, some of you average, and one person above average, no one perfect. And you know what? I don't think anyone is out there that's perfect right now. It's a very, very tricky thing to do well and do right. So I am going to revisit that later, and we're going to cover drought and shortage really fast because I know it's something that's been coming up and people have been thinking about it a lot. So I want to cover, I'm in the Water Conservation Office, and conservation is a little bit different than resources. So water resources is securing a water supply and creating water policy, whereas water conservation is efficiently using the supply once it's been secured. So they're two halves of the same coin. They're related, but they're not quite the same thing. Water resources, water policy has an extremely long and complicated history in the West. We had an entire workshop that was talking all about water resources, the Colorado River, the shortage. We did that a couple of weeks ago on October 14th. We recorded that workshop and it is now available online. So if you have questions about any of that, very understandable, I encourage you to go watch that workshop. And then you can always email us any questions you have about it. The cool thing on the conservation side is it doesn't really matter where we are in the shortage or in drought, or if it's just a normal year, our message always stays the same. Regardless of supply status, the message of conservation is efficiently using water conserves supply, reduces demand, saves money, and promotes a healthy, sustainable environment. So that's our goal when we're looking at revitalizing our HOAs. With that said, there are a growing number of models, information that's been coming out and being kind of given to us that we are looking at a hotter and drier future in Arizona. We could have potential for periods of extremely high rainfall that could lead to some flooding. So we're just looking at a landscape that can have some pretty crazy extremes every now and again. I mean, we saw in last summer 2020, we had a very hot summer. A lot of people up their irrigation during that summer. We even saw some saguaro deaths. So that's kind of a unique situation. You know, when you have plants in that kind of extreme heat, they become stressed, they're more prone to disease and parasites. Obviously, they require more water. And we do have a program from our fire department, especially up if you're along the McDowell Mountain Preserve, about wildfire proofing. And I know some HOAs have been a part of that program. So that all kind of rolls into that. And that's something that we kind of want to keep in the back of our mind as we move through the rest of this presentation. So let's get into revitalization. What is it? Revitalization is imbuing new life or vitality. It's preserving what's important while addressing challenges. And that's really a key part of it. It's not a complete redo. It is not a gut job. It's not ripping everything out. It's about staying true to your community and providing upgrades and amenities. It's long-term planning. It's sustainability. It's very collaborative. It's an opportunity. Some other words that you may want to use when you're talking to your residents, if you're a board member, if you're not a board member, is enhancement, rejuvenation, strengthening, renewal, amplification. If you want to be doing these types of projects in your HOA, framing is extremely important. How you communicate these ideas will ultimately decide whether or not everyone gets on board. If it comes from you know, a very upset place, which is a natural reaction. And when we see something that we're upset about, is that we can kind of imbue that same emotion. But if we come through it, you know, wanting to revitalize, wanting to be more sustainable, that's much more approachable for people. So again, what is it not? It's not ignoring history. It's not single vision. It needs to be collaborative. It can't just come from one person. It can't be short-sighted. So often we'll see kind of knee-jerk reactions or something that is, you know, something bad happened. And so people just want to fix it right away. They want to put a Band-Aid on it. They don't want to address the actual problem that's there. It's not confrontational. It is not opportunistic. So it is an opportunity, but it's not opportunistic for someone to get something that they may want, which is often the case that we find. And really importantly, it's not regular maintenance and repairs. So if you have something, if you need, it's been 15 years since you repaved or painted something or updated your irrigation system, it's not really that. There is a difference that should be occurring anyways. We know when we have systems, when we have infrastructure that we're going to have to maintain and repair it. It's a little bit more than that. So let's get into HOA planning. So I work on the HOA program with several other people in our office. And this is something that I talk to HOAs a lot about. I think I've spoken to some of you. I think I recognized your names on the registration list. So often when an HOA comes and talks to us, we talk about these things. They come to us with these concerns. They want to do some sort of upgrade. They're looking to get incentives. They want to increase their efficiency. They want to do a beautification project. They want to increase accessibility. They want to be sustainable. And when they come to us with those questions, I say, well, what's your goal? What's your goal for your community? What long-term vision do you have? And oftentimes there isn't an immediate answer for that. And so that gets into, do you have a master plan? What are your community goals and what are your community values? Now, this doesn't have to be something that's extensive. It doesn't have to be some huge document, but just getting everyone on the same page and saying, what is your favorite part about this community? Why did you move here? What's important? What do we want to preserve? What do we want to change? And getting everyone on the same page. It's kind of remarkable when you sit everyone down in a room and you ask them that, the variety of answers that you get, because your perspective is thinking, well, obviously it's this, but then you learn that other people have very different opinions. And then when we get into that conversation, typically someone says, well, that's all great, but we don't have a budget for it. And so we have to move back even further and we have to talk about the financial budgets, and then we have to talk about the water budget. And water, of course, is a part of finance. It's usually one of the highest, bills within an HOA is the water bill. So we have to talk about that if we're going to do any changes. And then, this is really the key. The most basic level is the maintenance and repairs in the HOA. And that is usually taking up the most time and the most budget, is just kind of running around and keeping things up to date. There are irrigation repairs, there's leaks that are happening, and this is specifically on the landscape realm. And then there's pruning. Now we find that most often in this arena, a lot of the attention is given to the pruning. So the cutting of the trees, the cutting of the grass, that gets all the attention. Usually leaks and irrigation only come into play when something's really egregious, when there's usually like a fountain of a sprinkler happening. So what we want to see is actually a flow this way, when typically we see a flow the other way. I would say that revitalization falls into this area, having a master plan and doing these kind of upgrades. It's really fun. It's when you're looking at a house, it's putting on the new countertops, it's putting in new cabinetry, laying new floors, but you can't do that, or it's not advised to do that if the plumbing in the house, the electrical in the house isn't right. So we have to talk about the maintenance and repairs in the budget if we're going to get to revitalization, because you can, as I say, you can put lipstick on a pig, but if what's underneath isn't serving you, you're going to end up into this same trap. And we've seen people pump a lot of money into a revitalization plan, and then they don't maintain it. And then in a couple of years, they're upset by the degradation of the huge project that they put into place. The good news is we have several programs to help you out in that realm. We have water use and meter location services, Water Smart. We have an irrigation consultation. We have water budgeting through Water Fluence. And then we have water budgeting. And then we also have a different application as well. And we have rebates. So I'm going to cover those really fast because they are absolutely free services to you as a city. So we love to promote them. We love to work with you, and they're free for you, which doesn't happen very often nowadays to have free services. So let's start covering those. And then, all right, let's get into water use. So often when we look at a bill, we get complaints, we get phone calls, our water bill went up by so much, the money. And understandably, we focus on the money. But one of the first things I do is I pull the water use information, I look at the gallons, because I want to know if the amount of water used change. Because there are some parts of the bill that do vary. Sometimes the cost of water goes up. That's pretty much how it's been happening over time. The cost of water does increase. And then there are other parts of the bill as well. There are sewer fees. Your sewer fees can change. And then if you have environmental services, you have trash and recycling services. I think about a year or 2 years ago, they did a big overhaul on the trash and recycling. And a lot of the fees went up there. And we got a lot of phone calls because people said, my water bill went up. I'm using too much water. And we're like, no, you're using the same amount. It was your environmental services fee that increased. So typically for an HOA, we try to look at the landscape only meters. Here in the Valley, we say up to 70% of your water use is outdoors. For HOAs, it can be even more. So that is where our focus is. We can help and advise on the indoor side. That can be a part of it, but typically we're looking at the outdoors. We see the pattern on the right here is so common. This is typically what I see when I graph out water use in an HOA. We kind of see this, what you want is to see a bell curve. What we see here is in January, February, March, we're kind of chronically underwatering. And then we kind of react to the weather heating up and we crank up the water. And then we dip it down in October, turn it off because we're going to overseed. And then we crank it on really hard for that overseeding. And remember that water bills are always in arrears. So the November water use really occurred in October, et cetera. And then a little bit higher in December because we have those winter visitors. And then we drop it back down because we get the bill from our overseeding. Then we go, oh my gosh, and then we crank it back again. We really recommend that the HOA board track water use data, not just how much is being spent, but the actual gallons used. What's amazing in the past is you used to have to translate that from paper bills. But I can do a one-time pull for you and pull about 4 to 5 years of water use data and send that your way. It'll be an Excel file and you can use that. Or if you don't want to wait for me to do that for you, because it's a common request and there's going to probably be a lot of people in line in front of you, you can always now with WaterSmart go in and download your own data. It comes in a really nice Excel spreadsheet. It's even nicer than what I get out of our billing system. And you can start tracking that data for yourself. It's really important. We have a law in the state that after about 5 years, we have to get rid of water use data. So if you're not keeping it, we're not. We have to get rid of it after a certain amount of time. So I highly recommend that you download that information. And this will establish your baseline. You will know where you're starting now. And then that will give you an idea if your revitalization project did what you wanted it to do. So if you don't get this baseline information, you have nothing to compare your results to. And so I think this is really an important step to give you an understanding of where you should focus your efforts. Since I mentioned WaterSmart, just really quickly, it's a web-based water management portal. It's super cool because now everyone has access. You can also send text message alerts of high water use bills. If you have something that we call automatic metering infrastructure or AMI, you can see hourly data. We're seeing that in HOAs now. And when you have that hourly data, you can set leak alerts, which is really exciting for an HOA. You have big property. You want to see what that, if you have a leak going on. Again, multiple users can log in. You can have the board, you can have the management company, you can have the landscaper. And then you can manage those logins as well. So if you happen to switch a company, you can switch them out. So meter infrastructure and location services. Often HOAs have no idea where their meters are or how many that they have. Your metering design could depend on a lot of different things. Typically it's age, just what was popular at that time, and the servicing. So older HOAs have the unfortunate kind of situation where you may have mixed meters, which means that you have outdoor and indoor use on one single meter. What we like to see is having landscape and indoor use separated. It just makes it a little bit easier. Sometimes you'll have a situation where your indoor use is all coupled together. So everyone, you just get one bill for 70 units. And other times we'll see where it's separated to, maybe 4 or 5 residents, or you'll have individual metering for the indoors. It's very difficult to retain this infrastructure information. And what I want to point out is that right here, I think I've got my laser pointer. Right here, this is our responsibility up to this point. This is the meter. Everything after the meter was designed and installed either by your developer or someone that the developer hired. So all of this infrastructure within your community, the piping, the valves, the irrigation controller, all of that is, that is your responsibility as an HOA. And we have no idea where it's at. We didn't install it. We don't maintain it. It is completely up to the HOA. So it's very, very important to get that information, because you can't manage a system if you don't know where it's at. Often we find the landscaper has that information. It's usually not written down, but when they leave, they don't leave that information for you. And so then the next landscaper comes in and they have to relearn it. So I really, really recommend that you as an HOA get this information, figure it out, record it, and keep it. Because it is valuable. Again, too, if you want to go in for a revitalization project, it'd be really great to know if you have a main line running through an area, because that is, you don't want to hit into that, because that's going to be a problem. All right, let me take my laser pointer back off.
Adria, we had a question about how you can find out if you have AMI.
You can find out if you have AMI. We have a wonderful website. Oh, I should have put it up here. If you go to our website, scottsdaleaz.gov, and you search WaterSmart, we have a website up and it tells you everything about WaterSmart. I meant to put the link in here. And you can go online, you can search it, and then it has a map as well. So you can see where the AMI is installed. And then, because it's a huge infrastructure project for us, so it is being done in phases. And just like everything else, some of our materials and supplies the last year, almost 2 years, has also had some difficulty. But you can also go into WaterSmart and log in. And when you log in, you'll see whether or not you have hourly data. If you have hourly data, it will be in there. But that's how you can do that. All right. So our irrigation consultation. Oh, and it looks like we are going to put the website up, so that way you guys can access that. Irrigation consultation. This is a very popular service. We don't recommend or do full-scale audits. The reason why is it's gonna be very difficult to find someone in the valley to do that. B, typically when you go through one zone or 2 zones, a drip zone and a spray zone, whatever you find there is likely happening across your entire service area. So it's just not necessary to spend that time and resources. It's just not going to happen. And then we don't have the time. I mean, because like a full scale irrigation audit would take days, and unfortunately we just don't have those resources. But we will teach you to read your meters and how to perform a leak check. We can help you log into WaterSmart. We can do all of that. Just kind of provide you the tools and resources to get yourselves going. And we're just looking for the most common occurrences. Like I said, if this is happening on one zone, it's happening everywhere. I mean, that's just kind of how that rolls. So if you have high or low pressure, missing or damaged sprinkler heads or emitters, mismatched equipment is a big one. And then signs of overwatering that you should be looking for is leaves on plants being a lighter shade of green or yellow. I think often people see yellow leaves and they think it's not getting enough water, and then they pour on more water, and then it makes it even worse. Young shoots being wilted, excessive growth, algae or mushrooms. And then signs of overwatering grass include constant puddling in areas. That should be a big one. Kind of a musty odor, soil that is extremely soft and mushy. I've been on some where I feel like I'm almost walking on water. And then again, algae and mushrooms are a big one as well. So these are some of the signs that you should be looking for around your HOA. And these are things that in the past may not have, triggered you to go, that's a problem. But all of these are problems. So starting in the upper left, we have overwatering, puddling around this tree. We have a clogged sprinkler. You can see that the spray isn't uniform. You see that all the time. It may look like it's performing well, but it's not. Sunken sprinklers are also really, really common. Exposed irrigation. And may I add, on the clogged or sunken sprinklers, you'll probably see unevenness in the grass. You'll see patchiness. You'll have areas that are, and you can almost sometimes see the ring of where that sprinkler is failing. You can see that it's not, and actually I have a photo coming up. I can point that out, but exposed irrigation, that's never good. Misaligned sprinklers, where they're just shooting straight onto a sidewalk. Leaking valves, so you can have floating valve lid boxes. A broken sprinkler, that one, the one is completely torn off, and when that thing turns on, it's actually a geyser. Fungi, there's a little white mushroom growing in the bottom right hand corner, and then high pressure, so you'll see that mist. It's great, it'll pull you off, but that is actually way too high of a pressure for those nozzles. They are not operating very efficiently. And it's really important, and I want to emphasize this, is that irrigation efficiencies and leaks are revitalization hacks. An efficient irrigation costs you money, it destroys infrastructure and contributes to plant decline. Revitalization costs your community money, so improving irrigation efficiency and stopping leaks can save you money, so you can do those projects. And a lot of the times I end up asking people is, are you unhappy with your landscape, or are you unhappy with how it is watered and maintained? That's the big thing, because sometimes if you fix the watering and the maintenance, you may not hate it as much as you thought. Kind of like painting a room. Did you really need to tear down the wall, or did you just need to paint the room?
Adria, before you move on, we have a question. What is mismatched equipment?
Mismatched equipment would be like having a Toro next to an Orbit, next to a Hunter. So they're equipment that is from different brands. So when you put together a sprinkling system or sprinkler system, you should be using all of the same brand, because they were all made to go together. So we see that really, really common, that things will just be repaired with whatever the landscaper has and not necessarily what the HOA wants. So I highly encourage HOAs to say, we'll buy our equipment, but when you repair something on our property, you need to repair it with X. You need to repair it with a Hunter, replace like for like, we want to keep that. So water budgeting, like I said, if you can stay within a budget or control a budget, here's that same graph again of water use. Now we have the black dotted line of where their budget is. Clearly they're over budget in some months. That's water that you can be saving and banking to put toward a revitalization project. And then water is extremely corrosive. We see lots of problems from overwatering happening to infrastructure. So if you can stop that infrastructure damage from happening or stretching out when you need to do those maintenance on those things, you're going to be saving money and you can do more exciting things in your HOA. So we help with water budgeting. We can help you come up with that for your HOA. We use a very transparent science-based process. It's probably the number one, the best educational tool that we can provide to you. And you can look at it exactly like financial budgeting. You're not beholden to exactly what your budget is. There are always extraneous circumstances that kind of affects it, but it gives you an idea of where you should be. And that's really important. It gives you kind of a guiding principle to kind of aim for. So I'm going to launch the same survey and ask again after learning all of that, do you think your HOA landscape performs? And I'm curious, again, it's anonymous, so please feel free to answer truthfully. All right, yeah, we have a little bit more coming in on the needs improvement level. And then a lot of people on the average, not the best, not the worst. Oh, I feel so bad. I knocked out the person who said they were doing above average. and that's okay. That's why we're here. It is, like I said, it is very, very difficult. And there's not a ton of information in that realm. And we have a very challenging climate on top of it. So yeah, I mean, then let's get into it. So before we continue on, you're like, I'm here for a revitalization class. I'm getting there. This is all, like I said, this is all leading into it. I really quickly want to go over players and roles. And I have to emphasize that you are ultimately responsible for the HOA. If you live in an HOA, it's not the property manager, it's not the landscaper, it's you. And thank you so much for being here today and listening to this. It's a fantastic start. And we only see benefits when people get involved and they start working with us or they work with neighborhood services. They always have positive results. And we love seeing that. Board members and community members have to work together. It's not up to either or. Too often we see people making decisions on behalf of you, which we don't like to see because it's in some way taking the power away from you. And those people can be very well intentioned and you can trust them, but ultimately they don't have a long-term investment in the community. They don't live there. You live there. So you want to make sure that what's happening in your community is something that it is really a reflection of your community values and your goals, and that you're continuously moving towards those values and goals. And again, the money for all of this, it comes out of your pocket, it comes out of your dues. The landscaper doesn't pay for the water, and the property manager may pay your bill, but it's not with their credit card. And the reverse side of that, though, is always you get what you pay for. So always kind of be, if you get in a super low bid, be very, okay, what does this include? Because we've seen some people be oversold and undersold for what it is that they need. So board members, please check out Citizen Services at the neighborhood college. They have lawyers come and you can speak and they do presentations. They record them, they're online, and you can talk to them and they're a fantastic resource. Basically, it comes down to an HOA board of directors has a fiduciary duty to their association and their members. I took this from a website because this is really Citizen Services realm, so I don't want to get too far into it. But I highly encourage you go check them out, and they're a phenomenal resource. You don't have to do this alone. We have this resource in the city, and I think that's very, very cool. You're in a position of trust and authority. It's overwhelming, but it could be very, very exciting. And often people look up the chain to make a difference. And you don't have to do that. You can start right there in your community. That can make such a huge impact. We hear it all the time. Oh, we saw this community next door do this. We really want to do it now too. So you can be a catalyst for a change if you're in a master HOA and your sub HOA does it. And then, the next HOA over may be like, I want to do that too. So you can really start to kind of create a snowball effect. And I really think that all information documents, everything should be filtered through the board first. You as a board should not have to ask an outside entity for your records or information. You should have access to it 24/7 all the time. If any of those vendors were to suddenly go out of business, you should not be SOL. You should have that information. Residents, you're not off the hook just because you're not on the board. Be understanding that the board members are volunteers, report challenges as necessary, but also provide feedback. It's really difficult when all you hear about is all the stuff you hate. If you like certain things about the community, and I see this happen all the time in revitalization projects, no one knew that something was well loved. And so then it's removed or altered. And then everyone comes out like, I love that tree. Why did you take it down? Well, no one told us. We didn't know that everyone loved that tree. So you have to comment the positive things as well. Otherwise you risk those too. And then always be willing to bring a solution to the table, volunteer for committees. I love this new landscape committees. You could have a revitalization committee. It doesn't have to be the responsibility of the board. You can institute a committee to take on these tasks. And then to the board, remember, ultimately you serve the residents. And I see this happen too when a community is not ready for a change, trying to force that change. And if you don't have resident input, what you do may be unappreciated, unwanted. It can create feelings in you that it's frustration, you're upset. So it really needs to be that two-way street. Property managers, again, they're excellent resources of information and experience, but they are not the authority on that community. You are. They should always be advisors, but they should not ultimately make decisions for you. And again, they should be secondaries on all accounts. You should be the primary. So that way, if anything happens, you have access to everything. And I know it's very difficult because we move into HOAs because we want to divorce ourselves from having to take on that responsibility. And you will. You won't have to actually physically go out there and mow the lawns and trim the plants, but you do need to provide input, especially on the long-term goals and planning. Because if you don't do that, you're just leaving it to someone else. And it's usually someone who doesn't have a long-term interest in the community. Landscapers want to make you happy. And they're often tasked with way too much responsibility. And they don't pay the water bill. So often when they hear that people are upset, and a lot of the times the feedback is you're not watering enough, so they turn up the water, and it doesn't really help anything. Usually it doesn't really help anything. It usually makes things worse, and they don't mind because they don't pay that water bill. So make sure you're communicating with the right people. Often we complain to the people that we actually see in the community when they're not the ones making the decisions. You got to call the landscaping office. And they're also beholden to your budget. So they can't, they can't, if you don't give them a budget and if you're not allowing them the opportunity to fix things, then when you go to water, of course, you're going to have high inefficiency. If you're not giving them a budget to do maintenance and repairs, they're going to have to apply more water. They're only working with a 40% efficiency. They can't make magic happen. And there's a very big difference between maintenance and management. A lot of us hire for maintenance and then we don't hire for water management. It's very uncommon, actually. Despite living in the desert, most landscaping companies don't really do water management. So some trends we see in landscape maintenance, again, most contracts are not irrigation based. But we're seeing now, we've actually talked to an HOA that just hired two companies. They hired a maintenance company and they hired an irrigation company, which is very interesting. And I'm very curious to see how that turns out. I think it's a really great idea, actually. So that way they can both focus on their own thing, because realistically doing both of those jobs is a very, very large task. And we have to keep that in mind. That's asking a lot of a company, especially when we're looking to try to reduce costs as much as possible. And we do see a lot of inappropriate shearing and pruning practices. And some of it comes from that this is environment that people are unfamiliar with the plant material and may not be properly trained on how to deal with them. So things like agaves and like aloes, they really only need to be pruned when one of the leaves die, which is not very common. So you see in that bottom left-hand corner that those are unnecessary prunes. But the reason why they happen because, they had pokey, stems of the plant that were by driveways and sidewalks. But you should, they call that pineappling. Some people do it on purpose. They like the image of that. But if that's not what you want, if you don't want a pineapple, you don't need to pay to have someone prune that. It doesn't need to be pruned. We see lots of shearing of shrubs. A lot of that, again, has to do with an overplanting. And then we see line tailing. That's the bottom right-hand corner. That Palo Verde is lion tailed. It's unfortunate when that happens to a tree. It can be very difficult for them to rebound from. And usually it happens because week after week they're coming out and there's this expectation that they need to be pruning so you are getting your money's worth. And so they'll prune because they're on a schedule. They're coming once a month, every other week. And, they're like, well, I pruned this branch last time. Now I'll prune this one. They're not always necessarily going by what needs to be pruned in that moment. And so you'll end up with this line tailing because you just gradually keep moving up the branch. And, most of the time we put in trees because we want shade. Lion trailed trees are not going to provide you shade. And there's this misconception that they are storm proofing or monsoon proofing the trees. And that's not the case at all. It actually makes them more susceptible to having branches break. So overseeding, we have to talk about it. It's a fantastic opportunity if you're looking for a way to save some money for a project, to go a couple of years without overseeding. What's important to know, and I find that there is this misconception talking to people, you must choose to overseed each year. There's a misconception that you must overseed. Now, an HOA may have a rule, a CCNR that you have to overseed, but there is no requirement from the city, state level for you to overseed, and the grass doesn't need to be overseeded. In fact, there are two species of grass, the warm season grass and the winter grass. Overseeding damages the warm season grass, and it makes it very difficult for it every year. So if you see your grass struggling in the summer and you're overseeding, which is very, very common, that could be why. The biggest spikes, as you saw in the water use graph, is always in the overseeding month, always, always, always. And that's because we're laying down way too much water to get that seed started. Usually the landscaper, again, will crank up the water and then they leave for a couple of days. And so it runs way more than it needs to. And then that's when we get in the conservation office, all of our complaints for overwatering is during overseeding or water in the streets, sorry. Strategize areas to overseed. If you have places that no one really walks, no one uses, no one looks at, don't spend the money and the time and the resources. I mean, I know this year the overseeding prices I've heard coming in are extremely expensive, and it's been very difficult to get the supplies. So strategize areas that you see, that you use, and then focus on those, and then let the rest go dormant. As you can see, this idea actually, the golf courses love it. They do it. And you can see there that they have the area that's active, that's overseeded. And I recently learned that they actually use some colorant. So that's, don't look at that grass. It's like filters on Instagram. They are actually using some colorant to make it look that deep and dark and green. But the areas outside of it that they know aren't going to be used, they trim it up, they make it look really nice, and they don't overseed it. And what's really cool about that is for us who live in Arizona full time, it gives us a sense of a changing season. We don't really have a lot of deciduous trees here. So it's kind of nice. It's our grass changes with the seasons. And again, besides a few select places, Scottsdale parks don't overseed either. So it's not a standard that I think sometimes people have the impression that it is, or feel compelled to do that. So finally, we're going to get into the top 10 revitalization tips. First, and they are in no specific order. They're not in order of importance. So don't worry about that, but this is quite important. It's location, location, location. Plants are like real estate. It's all about the location. So plants will grow to a known height and width. We know X tree will grow to be X tall and X wide. So often we are putting plants in spaces they do not fit. So if you'll see in the photo on the right, that bougainvillea, there's 3 of them. Those bougainvilleas will grow, they can grow 10 to 20 by 10 to 20. Huge. They can grow huge. And there's 3 of them in a space that's maybe 2 foot by 10, 12 feet. And it's right next to someone's patio. That is a guarantee. You will have to trim that plant for the rest of its life. It will not naturally fit there. The only time it will fit there is when you first plant it, because it's in a small pot. And that's what developers do all the time, because they don't live there. They develop it, they plant the stuff, and then they move away. And they leave it to you to fix. We also see lots of trees. We didn't know. It wasn't bad. No one had malintention. But, back when a lot of these places were put in, people put in cute little trees, and in the 60s and 70s, and now they've grown up to be big monsters, and they're giving us infrastructure problems. That's a wall there that's separating two communities. You have walls separating between you and your neighbors. You have your home. You need that infrastructure. You don't have a choice to move that infrastructure. The tree's got to go. And that's what's really difficult. It may mean removing plants. Because as a wise person once said, a plant in the wrong place is just a weed. And that can be difficult, but I see shrubs a lot, especially sage. So many sages, they'll put like 10 sages in a small area, and you're constantly sharing them. And that removes the flowers, which is exactly the thing that you chose that plant for, is you wanted that foliage and those flowers. And so I recommend going through and thinning it out. And when you thin it out, if you have 8 plants and you reduce that to 4 or 3, you can let those grow, and then they'll grow, they'll get a really beautiful shape, natural shape to them. You'll get all the foliage, you'll get all the flowers, and then you don't have to pay to have them come and shear every month, every couple of weeks, because you're trying to fit them into a space that they don't fit in. Next, create a palette. This is so important, especially over time. This is one of those things that kind of gets away from us. Some plants do go out of fashion. Sometimes residents sneak in new plantings themselves. I'm guilty of this in the past. I snuck in an agave. I didn't think it was going to live, but it did. I snuck one into the HOA landscape. This can create a very choppy, kind of messy appearance to the eye, because you're just seeing all sorts of different kinds of plants. And often too, we'll select a whole bunch of shrubs with maybe a couple of ground cover. Usually it's lantana. So think about different forms, different textures, different colors. Green, look at all the different shades of green that are in this. You have the light silvery green, you have the more verdant green. Think about playing with that. And then really think about the seasons. If you can choose, if you can have plants in your palette where one's a winter bloomer, one's a spring bloomer, one's a summer bloomer, you'll have blooms all year long. So you'll always have a nice, interesting landscape. Again, use all different types of plants, cacti, trees, shrubs. Creates a lot of visual interest. It keeps your eye moving. Usually when you go someplace and you're like, wow, this looks so amazing and beautiful, that's what they're doing. And you can't put your finger on it, but that's what they're playing with. Some plants are becoming extremely difficult to maintain. We are hearing a lot of feedback from people that trimming palms has become impossible. They can't get people out to trim their palms, the really tall ones. So, I understand the want and the desire, but, take that into consideration if you're considering those plans. And then hardscapes should be cohesive too. And I know that can be difficult because sometimes you're like, they don't make what we used anymore. But, trying to keep that cohesive, you'll be surprised what, having different kinds of borders. And some places, honestly, if they just changed out the rock and made that all look the same, you would be surprised how immediately you'd be happier. Again, it's like putting a new coat of paint on a room. Start there. I see so many people go to an extreme. Start there and kind of assess from that point. Prepare for the inevitable. It's very sad, but plants are not immortal. A tree can live 100 years, 1,000 years. I think we get that image of sequoias in our head, but that's just not true. Especially in a very extreme environment like our desert. They have natural lifespans. They do eventually die. And on top of that, poor pruning practices, again, that's shearing, those gas shears. I understand why we use them. You have to cover a really large landscape. I'm going to come back to that point. But it's really difficult on these plants, and they do die prematurely. And again, with pruning, especially with some cacti and especially trees, a poor prune job where you take it too far, it could ultimately ruin that plant, which is really sad. It can ruin that plant, ruin that tree. If all of your plants were installed around the same time, start selectively replacing plants every year to spread out the costs. And then you'll actually have a naturally aging landscape. So you'll have a plant that's 1 year old, 5 years old, 10 years old. It will create variety and texture on its own. just like you would see out in nature. And I highly recommend include rejuvenation planting and a hardscape replenishment, so DG if you have it, in the yearly budget. So that way you'll be prepared when that happens. I mean, you can have a frost come in and kill out a bunch of stuff, or you can have, like last summer, we saw so many tree deaths. So just be ready for that. It's gonna come up, Murphy's Law. Consider engaging all of the senses when you're creating a landscape or you're looking to renovate. Often, in the past, I think that landscapes were made to be very visual, which makes sense. But we live in these landscapes, we walk through them, we engage with them. We're not just staring at them. So think about smell, think about in the summer when you're outside, because that's the only time you can be outside. Think about having night blooms. It's very common for native plants to bloom at night because that makes sense. That's when people are out, when all the critters and the pollinators. Think about having something that smells wonderful in the rain, like our creosote. Think about touch. Like we saw earlier, don't put spiky plants near walkways. It makes people hate cacti. And there are some varieties. There is a prickly pear that has absolutely no spikes or anything on it. It's completely smooth. You can also think about fuzzy plants or grasses. I think grasses are wonderful. On the right-hand side, you can see an eyelash grass. They're really fun. Kids love them. They are, great to the touch, completely harmless, and just a really cool visual interest. And then think about noise, grasses and trees. What's nice about sitting under a tree, you hear that wind going through the leaves. It's very soothing. And you can also use plants to block out noise. You can create hedges and block out things that you don't want to see or hear. And then what I think is really cool is we're seeing this kind of revitalization into including edible things into our landscape. So, and if you have patio homes where you don't have the opportunity to have a landscape or a yard, if you want to take part of your common spaces, create a community garden, put out plots for different people. You can also have medicinal or edible plants. There's tons of desert varieties for those. And then always, though, be cautious of poisonous plants. One that I see all the time being utilized, and I moved into a new development a couple of years ago, and they put it everywhere, was oleander. And we are a huge dog community. And I know you have to eat a bunch of it, but it is poisonous. And so think about that. You don't want to include those things in places. You don't want to, I wouldn't put it around a dog park, and personal preference. Set yourself apart. Developer landscapes tend to be repetitive. And that was because they just ordered a bunch of stuff at the same time, so it was cost effective. And we are as humans very monkey see, monkey do. We see what someone else does and we want to do it. And that's extremely common. And that's why you have that neighbor effect. So if you do something and someone else likes it, you see it popping up. But go a little bit different, find out, go back to those community goals and values and say, why did I move here? Did I want to engage with my neighbors? What do we have that makes us different than everyone else? And then just bring that into your landscape, bring that life, bring that vitality. Don't be afraid to use art features, create gathering spaces, do seating areas. Oftentimes I'll only see one picnic table or one bench. And it's you're a community of a couple hundred people, have some more seating areas. Use materials that do well here. Stone, concrete, tile. Southwest, we have such wonderful tile. Lots of different things to choose from. You can see gabions. Those are gabions at our own Scottsdale Zero Escape Garden. They are extremely popular right now. And they're very, very cool. And they're fairly low maintenance, which is really nice. And then water features are a logistical nightmare. We see them fail all the time, and they could be definitely prone to leaks. I also, because of that, I challenge you, if you want to put in a water feature, think of what it will look like without water. And then if you're going to include a water feature, why do we like water features? We like to listen to the water, and we like to get that coolness from the water. So put it in a gathering space or a seating area, so that way people can benefit from it. If it's just in a spot that you drive by, what real benefit is that providing to you? So you think about that, you can create like an oasis area and have it in there and some seating arrangements. Now, what's funny is looking at those top photos, those are photos that I actually took. I was very lucky enough, I got to go to Ireland, and, you know, they have beautiful English gardens, green everywhere, everywhere. And, and I went there and, you know, snapping a whole bunch of photos, and they were so excited. They're like, yeah, we got some new additions to our English garden. I was like, oh, what is it? And it was that plant on the right. They had put in an agave, and they were so excited about it. And I think it's, you know, it's curious human nature. We want what we don't have. And so I understand, you know, and I went to their farmer's market. Everyone was selling cacti. They loved it. They had yellow barrels everywhere. You know, we always want that thing that we can't have. So how do we incorporate that and make it a little bit different? So that way, you know, kind of sets us apart. Bit functional. It is the most amazing thing in the world when you have something you love that is low maintenance. And, you know, it just works. So make it accessible. Again, include that seating and those walking paths. Make sure, you know, if you have a community where maybe you have older people, maybe people are using canes or walkers, wheelchairs, making sure that that's accessible to people. Stay away from that puzzle piece effect. I see it happen a lot. And here's an example in that photo. You know, that was all grass, but then they were getting infrastructure damage because of water, which happens again all the time. So they just said, we'll throw up some curving and put some granite down. Well, now you have 3 really weird pieces of landscape. That triangle in the corner, yeah, that's a nightmare to water. There is no good way to water that piece of grass. So it's not very functional. It was a good idea to save the infrastructure. It was just executed poorly. I consider it more of that like knee-jerk reaction. Keep plant water requirements on the same valve for easy irrigation scheduling. So you always have to water to your weakest link. So if you have lots of low desert, you know, low water use desert adapted plants and one high water use plant on a line, you have to water to the high water use plant. Get rid of that high water use plant, you know, just keep everything the same. And if you are going to have a couple of high water use plants, you know, I don't want to encourage you to have a whole bunch, but if you are going to have a couple, keep them on the same line together. Again, reduce leaf litter in high traffic areas. Those bogeys right by somebody's patio, that's not going to make that person happy. And then keep away from infrastructure. Water is corrosive and damaging. And strips of grass, anything that's really less than 8 feet, which is about, you know, what sprinklers, you know, they make ones that are less than that, but they have extremely high application rates. It's just really functionally, it's extremely difficult to water those efficiently. And then you tend to get water on the sidewalk and pathways, and that can create a slip and fall hazard. With that said, I kind of just got into this strategize your green space. I love this photo because the end of the grass lines up perfectly with the sun because grass and trees don't get along. And often we see trees and grass, and we get people in the removal program who want to remove those areas because they're not functioning. It's not because you're not watering them. Typically, you're watering the heck out of them. It's just that warm season grass doesn't want to grow in the shade. So those are perfect opportunities to pop in some pressure compensating bubblers and kind of give those trees a nice soak and put in some nice little ground cover that's more appropriately sized and does well in the shade. Otherwise, you're going to be staring at this all the time, and that's no fun. And please remember, functional grass is a principle of xeriscape. We absolutely encourage you to have pocket parks. There are fantastic gathering spaces. I highly encourage you to avoid having super curvy lines. You know, there's a joke that architects don't know how to draw a straight line. And it's true. I mean, you see all these fun shapes. They're very difficult to water because, you know, those spray nozzles, they just don't want to function that way. And that's a limitation. And so it's kind of an interesting concept, but actually go and look at your irrigation and the nozzles first and find out, you know, okay, these throw 8 feet, and then measure out the grass area that you want to keep or you want to install, and make it fit the irrigation. And so that way it will get, perfect watering, and you will have no overspray if you stay on top of it, and it'll be much easier to water. So it's kind of a funny way to think about it, but yeah, those curvy lines are really a disaster. We've seen lots of overspray, lots of problems. And again, remove that grass near those sidewalks and those roadways. They're not functional. If there's a really great image that came out of Southern Nevada Water Authority. It's like, if you're not going to sit and picnic on it, is it really functional? That's a good way to look at it. Slopes are a nightmare, and they're even worse with our soil type. The water almost instantly runs off. If you're constantly having problems, especially slopes down to sidewalks or roadways, if you have private streets, you're paying to repave that road when that water is constantly running down it. And even in my community, we have brand new sidewalks, only a couple of years old, and that cement is being worn down from the overspray. And so that's money out of your pocket. You're eventually going to have to fix that cement. And again, trees and shade and grass are not friends. So I'm thinking about that. I'm sorry, I had some tea delivered to me. Actually, let me check to see if there's any more questions. Nope. Okay. I haven't lost you yet. We're almost there. Get friendly with the desert. Now, I'm not asking you to love it. I'm not asking you to embrace it. But I understand, this was very appropriate. Everyone's cup of tea, and I just got tea delivered to me. Working with what is native will lower watering requirements about 40 to 60%. We have something called KC, which is a plant requirement for water. It's the thirstiness of the plant, and it ranges anywhere from 0 to 1. And these are known research values. I promise I'm not making it up. But desert adapted native cacti are 0.15. Grass is 0.6 to 0.8. So huge difference, and you can see some significant savings. And they're used to our soil. We have very difficult soil here. In some ways it's amazing. In some ways it's absolutely terrible. So they don't require any fertilizer or soil modification. They grow here naturally. That's what they evolved to like. They're more likely to survive those hot summers, cold winters, and without irrigation. And that goes back to that very beginning when we were talking about, the only thing that we know is that we don't know anything. We in the next couple of years, look what we just went through in 2020. We had an insanely hot summer. And then this year we got a whole bunch of water. So if you want to kind of hedge your bets and go, well, I want a landscape that will withstand all of that without problems, then this going native is a fantastic way to go. Because it's going to ultimately give you the best bang for your buck, and you'll have to replace plants less often. I really recommend it for areas. We have huge landscapes. We have acres and acres of landscapes. And part of the conundrum that we're in is when we hire a landscaper, they're required to maintain and look at that entire area. That is a huge area. There are naturally places in all of our landscapes that no one goes to, no one really looks at. And the danger of those is you have infrastructure in the ground, you have irrigation in that ground. And we often see that we will have breaks, especially in drip irrigation. And that thing is dripping, constantly under the ground, seeping up, going into a wash. And, we'll get a call, someone further down the wash is going, oh my God, there's water in here. And we're tracing it back into some corner of a property, and we're calling them up, and they're like, we had no idea. We had no idea because no one walks back there. And so imagine what you could do in the spaces you do go to if you are able to free yourself from having to maintain infrastructure and plants in those areas you don't go to. And I think it's really important. It doesn't have to be ugly. It can still look really, really wonderful. And the great thing about a lot of these plants is that it does very well in the kind of weather that we get here. And let's face it, it is iconic. Arizona has an entire tourism industry that's devoted to coming out and visiting the desert, as you can see from the magazine here. So I think it could be a really wonderful thing to kind of put in that native landscape in areas that you don't go in very often, and then take that money and resources and invest it in those pocket parks, in those areas that people are actively using. And so that way you get the most bang for your buck, and you kind of free yourselves from having to worry about every inch of your landscape. We don't have time for that. And this goes right into low impact development, which is kind of more of a stormwater technique, but I see a lot of the time on properties that you all are facing grading issues. And that's because, your community was possibly built decades ago, and through flooding and storms, your DG and your dirt, it moves around. So it's not quite the same. You have settling too, even new landscapes. I had flooding issues a year after I moved into my place because I had settling. So that can be causing damage. If you have pooling water, you have water areas that stay wet all the time, can create some insect activity. You could be getting some cockroaches, you can have mosquitoes, really fun stuff. So incorporating some swales, some curb cuts. There is a wonderful, it's called low impact development. Mesa made a fantastic toolkit all about it. And it's really diverting and using that rainwater and that flooding to water plants. And so that way you don't have to use irrigation. And it's stopping you from having damage to your infrastructure. So you are controlling where that water goes. You're not leaving it up to chance. So civil engineers can be a part of that, can help you figure out that grading. I think that's a wonderful idea, especially if you've had issues in the past, maybe termites love moist soil. If you have had flooding, algae, mold, any of those problems in the past, it could be a good investment to get their opinion. And again, that native plants, the rainwater harvesting is like the lowest maintenance you can go, and it can look extremely attractive on top of it. And this is our last one, shade in the desert. So important, so important. I have some breaking news though, and that's Palo Verdes. While they are absolutely beautiful, they're not shade trees. They're functionally more like extremely large bushes. So if you look in that photo in the bottom right, when you look at those Palo Verdes that are out there, they look like big bushes. Their branches want to go all the way to the ground, and that's an adaptation for them to survive monsoons. They're not letting that wind in to rip them up, which is exactly why shearing them up that's why they fall over all the time. They're overwatered and they don't have their support. So really a terrible choice if you're looking for a shade tree. They're wonderful in the landscape and they're gorgeous and we all like to look at them, but if you're specifically looking for a shade tree, not the best option. And I see it shows for it all the time. They say with proper pruning, it can be a shade tree. But again, why select something that you're going to have to put in extra effort when you can just select a plant that already does what you want it to do? So, just think about that. You're just creating more work for yourself. And that goes back to just the difficulty of getting people involved in the HOA and the community because of the work. So don't create additional work. There are some wonderful trees out there. And the other photo is our garden again. Those are Palo Blancos, and they grow very upright and columnar. And there's lots of plants that just, they go straight up, and it's wonderful to put in between buildings into narrow areas. I wish more people would utilize them. And that way you don't have to trim them up, and then they'll have their branches and then they'll create the shade. So it falls in line, and it's going to give you a better result. Also consider incorporating non-plant materials for shade, shade sails. I know they used to be super expensive, but they're coming down in price. There's lots of great affordable options now, very visually interesting. They could be a way to bring in some additional color. Gazebos, other options, but do have a plan to protect trees that have historical significance, that are significant to your community, meaningful to your community. Definitely put that into place, especially if there's grass around it and you're considering removing that grass. Because back when a lot of those systems were installed, they didn't put in additional irrigation for the trees. They the trees are getting water because of the grass is getting water. So if you're removing the grass, you're going to have to install additional irrigation to protect those trees. Also, if you are a historical community, please consult with planning to make sure that there are no additional requirements from you as a historic area. And there are some things, saguaros being one of them. If you are looking at relocating or removing, those are also protected. So always keep that in mind. And, really, while plants can cool the environment, and they absolutely do, in the summer, or even when it's just a little bit hot out, where do people stand? They don't go stand in the middle of a grass area or in some shrubs. They're going to go stand under the trees. They're going to go stand under the shade. So in an area that has a lot of heat, it's very important to think about shade. And so our very last topic, just a plug for our own program. I have to do it. Warm season grass removal rebates. Minimum removal area of 2,000 square feet of warm season grass. So we don't do overseeded grass since it is an option and you don't have to do it. It's that permanent warm season grass that we're looking to remove. It's 25% of the conversion cost. It can go all the way up to $20,000. There is a maximum of $20,000 total for any property. So it's not like you can get $20,000 every year. You must receive planning approval, and that's for any commercial landscape. HOAs are considered commercial. So you must have planning approval, even if you're not getting a rebate from us. It's the perfect opportunity to include all the stuff that we just talked about because it's 25% of the conversion cost. So look at any of that and you can get 25%. So often we'll see people who, just do a little bit of a conversion and it's not really, we see it's really common, and actually it won't, I forgot to put it in the slide, but you need to remove whole zones of irrigation at one single time. And we say that because we've seen a lot of projects where people are just pulling grass like 2 feet off of the wall all the way around. And we have had customers end up very unhappy with that because they end up running the new drip off of the existing spray irrigation because it's very difficult to separate those in that type of removal. And doing that doesn't save you any water. It will save you infrastructure damage, but it's not going to save you water, and we are a water conservation office. So you do have to remove full zones of irrigation at once. It can just be one zone. It's not like you have to do them all, but it has to be an entire zone. And like I said, it's the perfect opportunity to do this. So go online, check that out. And I work in that program too. So I'm happy to answer any questions about it. And again, that was a lot of information. Thank you for sticking with me through it. And please ask away, ask questions. Well, I'll take a sip of my tea. No questions so far? Did I overload you? Hopefully I gave you a lot to think about. And of course, don't feel pressured to think of questions right now. You can always reach out to the Water Conservation Office, Water Conservation at scottsdaleaz.gov. Our number 480-312-5650, and say, I want to talk to you about the HOA program, and you'll be connected over. And